Please be seated. One of my children on the way home from school the other day said, "What creature is the most dominant one in the earth?" Or what thing? I can't remember the exact question. And to be clear, there is a right answer to the question, so I will tell you. But what would you say? What is the most, it was force. What is the most dominant force on the earth? I have to say, I thought immediately of the recent hurricane, honestly, of all the lives and businesses and homes that were lost as it wiped across the southeastern part of our country. It's a pretty dominant force. Many of these natural disasters are. And of course, being in the line of work that I am, I knew that the answer I was probably supposed to give was, God, right? The creator of all these things, of every living thing. But I got to thinking about it, and I was like, maybe really the answer should be us, right? Not because we necessarily are, but we certainly think we are, or think we ought to be. That our role is to somehow manipulate and control all of life and all that God has given us so that we can do whatever we think should be done with whatever God has created. It's germs, by the way, is the correct answer. I still don't know if it's a science lesson or a riddle, but that was the answer that my child was looking for. But it's wild because as much as we've come to know about germs and nature and the smallest cells and the farthest away stars, I feel like we are farther and farther from God's creation than we've ever been, right? So many people in this world probably live without really having much interaction with nature at all. You might have a small tree planted on the way to their commute, but even us, at least I can speak for myself, I love nature, I love getting out and hiking, but the chances I actually get to do it are not as frequent as I might like. And of course, we don't live like they did in the days of Jesus, where most people lived off the land, right? They worked as farmers in big and small ways, and so they had a different relationship with the land. Instead, we have become more to the tune of dominating, right? We use the earth, we use God's creatures to our own ends, so that they give us what we think that we need. And I get it. I've read the book of Genesis. I know that God said, "I give you dominion over the earth." But the thing is, dominion, even in English, which is not the language that the Bible was written in, doesn't have to just mean dominate. It's also a synonym for kingdom or commonwealth or community. What does God's dominion, God's kingdom, God's dream look like on this earth? Because I don't really think it's all about dominating. And I don't think St. Francis thought that either. St. Francis, to me, has a very peaceful vibe, right? Like he was just going with the flow. And rather than trying to make things into what he thought they ought to be, he chose to follow Jesus. And I don't know if you remember, but Jesus is God dwelling on earth. So what does it mean to be present to God dwelling on earth? And what if it's more than just listening to Jesus and his teachings and learning from his life, but also being present to all of God's creation around us? Because to me, Francis had a kind of curiosity, right? So he wondered, what's causing conflict in the Middle East? We'd still like to know the answer to that question. He wondered, why are people poor? Why are people hungry? Why is this wolf terrorizing this town? What are the birds up to anyway? And when he asked those questions, he found answers that helped him find a solution, right? Because it turns out the wolf was terrorizing the town because he was hungry. So they brought the wolf food and everything was fine. And obviously we haven't found the answer to all of those questions. But because Francis lived with a sense of curiosity and a sense of wondering, what is God doing in this world and how can I be a part of it? Francis left a footprint and impact that just lasts to this day. There's a group founded in his name that still does the things that he did. Care for the poor and the needy around them, care for creation, and work for sustaining peace. Now, if you're like me, when you heard today's gospel, you thought, oh great, This one again. Telling human beings not to worry is like telling them not to look at something or not touch it, right? Now you have to immediately do that. I wasn't worried before, but now that you've mentioned it, shouldn't I be worried about something? It's not easy to just cast worry aside. But the reality is this idea of trusting in God and in all that God is doing, right? That if God can care for the smallest things, then God too would care for us. To me, is the heart of what Francis was about. I mean, he understood that God made all things like Job understood, and he understood like Meister Eckhart that God is reflected in all of God's creation. But he also understood fundamentally that God's creation is what we all are, right? We're all a part of it. We all belong to God, and we all belong to each other. And I think that is the great gift that our pets have for us, the teaching, right? Because they don't worry. I mean, I have a dog and 2 cats, so I know that the phrase fighting like cats and dogs is not based on nothing. I'm not saying animals don't ever have conflict, right? I know how upset our dogs are whenever we leave the house for any reason without them. How dare we, right? Or how willing our cats are to wake us up at 4 a.m. if for some reason we've forgotten that is exactly when they need to be fed. But cats don't stay up all night worrying whether or not you'll get up at 4 a.m. to feed them because yesterday you only got up at 5 and that's not going to work for them. They don't live like that, right? When they're hungry, they come to you and say, I would like food now, right? When they're tired, they rest. When they're happy, you know it. When they're sad, you know it. When they're angry, you know it. They live trusting that all they have to do is be who God created them to be. And that is actually true for us too, if we could remember it in the midst of all the things that cause us anxiety. But that is why our pets are a blessing to us. There are so many reasons our pets are a blessing to us. But one of them is that they remind us of what it is to be a part of God's creation and to trust in the God who created us. There's an old story that an abbot, which if you don't speak church is the head monk, right? They were doing night prayer and the frogs kept interrupting them, right? So none of that. So the abbot sent out one of the monks. It was like, can you please go tell the frogs to stop? I don't know why you thought that was going to work. But instead, the monk came back with a message from the frogs. The frogs said, actually, we've finished night prayer and we're now doing morning prayer. So if you would stop interrupting us, we'd really appreciate that. So my hope is, as we celebrate St. Francis and the blessing of all of the animals in our lives, that we can remember that we are a part of God's creation, that it is not our role to try to make God's creation into what we think it should be, but to trust that God is moving in creation and to discern how we can join and be a part of what God is doing. So that we, with all the monks and all the frogs and all of God's creatures, can sing and pray to God together.